when a society collapses, you might ask, where does that leave its people? In this analysis of Book 8 of Plato's Republic, we'll see that he actually argues it's, to a large extent, the people's fault. After analyzing a large portion of Plato's Republic, we see here what he thinks an ideal city would look like, what its education system looks like, what its class system looks like. And for Plato, we now know he believes that there's really like a strict caste system with the guardian class, right, being the best of the people, the strongest, the smartest, the most honorable, being at the top. And they don't really have to earn money themselves, right? They get taken care of by the efforts of the rest of the citizens of the society. Now, Plato does see this vision, this organization of society eventually collapsing into something, well, it goes through a gradual set of changes. And the first change that occurs here is really due to the fact that there is a money-making class, and another class below them, the auxiliary class that does most of the labor and everything. But what he believes will eventually end up happening is that the honor of the money-making class will eventually be somewhat unnaturally exaggerated. And people will use the wealth that they make through their efforts in this class to change society into a way that will better suit their desires and needs, leaving the benefit of the larger society as a secondary priority, essentially. So, according to Plato, like the very idea of like this separation of the classes, right? Because the guardians are at the top, moneymakers and auxiliary are lower. And remember, we have the whole idea of the noble lie, in which the members of these classes are essentially preordained by the makeup and the nature of their soul, right? Plato compares these to different precious metals. The guardians have gold in their souls, sometimes silver. The moneymakers and auxiliary have bronze and copper, respectively. So due to society's mixing of these classes, this eventually becomes a conflict that leads to the eventual degeneration of this ideal city, which is, why it doesn't actually exist either, according to Plato. A nice quote from the text that demonstrates this is, "And the chaotic mixing of iron with silver and of bronze and gold engenders unlikeness and inharmonious irregularity, which, once they arise, always breed war and hatred. Each of these two races, the iron and bronze, pulled the regime toward money-making and the possession of land, houses, gold, and silver, while the other two, the gold and the silver, led the souls toward virtue." In this quote here, we see Plato saying that there are basically these two tensions, these two tendencies within society toward virtue and toward personal and private interest. And that tension will eventually cause a disruption to this perfect organization. The next transformation in society we see, or that Plato at least describes, is from what he calls a timocracy, or a society that values nobility, aristocracy, and virtue, to an oligarchy, which is a society that allows people with more resources to rule. Now, he sees this as a result of that money-making class and its interests being inflated above the desire for virtue and for betterment. Now, this corresponds to his analogy of the city being like the soul, right? We talked about that in Book 4. The perfectly just city and the perfectly just soul are alike in that there are essentially these three stages, and each has their own part to play. And there's one part that should be in ruling, essentially. For the city, that is the guardian class. The guardian class should rule over the moneymakers and the auxiliaries because they are the most noble, most virtuous. And then in the soul, there are the three parts: the calculating, the spirited or feeling, and desiring. And he believes the calculating part should rule over the spirited or feeling and desiring parts of the soul. Now, we see with a shift in the city toward money-making, we see an analogous shift in the soul of the individual toward desiring, right? So as the city values money and wealth and possessions more, the souls of the citizens are more heavily weighted toward desiring things. And what this results in is that the rich rule the land and the poor are excluded, regardless of their ability. See, in the previous organization of the city, the democracy, people ruled because of their ability. It's essentially a kind of meritocracy. In the oligarchy, Plato argues that people will end up being in charge simply because they have more resources. And he thinks that this is an issue. He gives an example of a ship, right? So on a ship, the captain who leads the ship, shouldn't be captain because they have the most money. They should be the captain because they know the most about leading a ship. And this is an example he has used previously, right? The leader of the ship may not be doing all of the tasks that each of the individual sailors would be doing, but they know that they are supposed to be done. They know how they are supposed to be done. They rule because they are knowledgeable. Now, in the oligarchy, we no longer have the knowledgeable ruler. We have the wealthy ruler. And that may leave somebody who is better suited to the position, more knowledgeable, more virtuous, not being the leader simply because they don't have as much wealth. And this becomes a problem. So there's a nice quote here from this section of the text too. It says, "The regime founded on a property assessment in which the rich rule and the poor man has no part in ruling office. Surely, when wealth and the wealthy are honored in a city, virtue and the good men are less honorable." So this is necessarily, too, for Plato, a form of injustice, as those concerned with getting things, with acquiring wealth, are valued more highly than those who are concerned with acquiring virtue. The next stage of society that Plato sees occurring is actually a democracy. Now, he doesn't mean democracy in the sense that we mean it today, in which the people play a part in in making decisions about the government of their society. He means a democratic, as in essentially a flattening of the values, that there's no prioritization of certain goods over others anymore. Everything is equally as valuable within a democratic society. Now, he sees this as, similarly to the way that a democracy becomes an oligarchy. He believes an oligarchy will naturally give way to a democratic society because people see an innate form of injustice in the wealthy ruling simply due to their wealth. And Plato believes that is correct, but he does also believe that the democratic form of society, which necessarily follows this, isn't actually any better. So he does describe it as a society that is concerned primarily with freedom, with people's freedom to do and pursue whatever they want. And he describes this as people pursuing both necessary and unnecessary goods with equal attention. Now, it's fairly obvious, right? A necessary good, though, he describes as one that we cannot turn away from without feeling some form of guilt. So if you avoid a necessary good, you feel guilty about it. If you avoid an unnecessary good, you might actually feel good about it. It's like giving up something you don't need that is maybe pleasurable or fun, but you don't need it. And it's fine. It's fine to go without it. That said, he does believe that in a democratic society, what occurs is that we don't see any real distinction between necessary and unnecessary goods. And this does, in fact, give people the freedom to pursue whatever it is they want in the world. But it leads us to a place with no guiding values, no guiding light, no higher values that the society as a whole strives toward. And this actually becomes a form of disorganization. And he calls it disorder disguised as liberty. So, look, and he will say that in theory, this seems really nice, people being able to do whatever they want, and not having to feel like they are pursuing something that is not worthwhile. But it is ultimately disorderly and pathological for the functioning of an ideal society. And he does believe that this will eventually give way to the worst form of society, a tyranny. Before we get into that, just a quick quote. If someone says that there are some pleasures belonging to fine and good desires, and some belonging to bad desires, and that the ones must be practiced and honored, and the others checked and enslaved. Rather, he shakes his head at all this, and says that all are alike and must be honored on an equal basis. The final transition in society is one from the democratic society to the tyrannical society. Now, Plato believes this as a natural consequence of our increasing desire for things. So the aristocratic society devolves into the oligarchic society because of our desire for wealth. And the oligarchic society devolves into the democratic society because of our desire for freedom. And the democratic society devolves into tyranny because of a desire for order. So with all of the liberty, the equalization of all values that occurs in a democratic society, there is a necessary amount of disorder that comes from this. There's less organizational efficacy. And because of this, the people start to yearn for stronger leadership, for a singular direction. And that is what they get in the form of the tyrant. A tyrant arises naturally out of this. There is a person whose character pushes them to lead and to take charge of others. And even Plato says the tyrant is naturally someone who is happy to sacrifice other people in the name of their end goal. And they will steer society toward their end through the sacrifice of others. He also believes that this results in a subversion of all natural states of order. There's a flattening of order, essentially, right? So there's just the tyrant up above everybody else, and then the rest of society below them. Whereas he does believe in the ideal aristocratic or timocratic society, there are certain natural orders. There's humans and animals. There are old and young. There are students and teachers. He even believes, men and women have a similar natural order to them. We've discussed that too in the Education of the Guardians. I believe that was book 3. It's like 3, 4, 5, around there somewhere. And all of these natural orders are subverted in the tyranny. The only person with any power is the tyrant. Everybody else is powerless. And this results in a great deal of destruction and loss for the city. You lose freedoms, you lose people, you lose the guiding principles of virtue and justice that he believed were present in the aristocratic society. So, one last quote to represent this form of society. Too much freedom seems to change into nothing but too much slavery, both for private man and the city. So what do you think? Which form of society are we living in now? I think we have a dedication to democratic values. Do you think that this has the drawbacks that Plato thinks it does? Is there a better organization of society? Let me know in the comments. Give the video a like and a subscribe if you like what we're doing here. We'll be back soon for Book 9.